negatively impacts us on a number of levels. One is just the sheer amount of information, regardless of how we judge it, good, bad, neutral. The sheer amount of information is, again, overwhelming to our nervous systems, to our bodies and brains. The light, that much light is problematic in a number of ways, but also the specific content that we're often exposed to, especially on places like Facebook, where the algorithm really knows us incredibly well. It is often feeding us information that is scary to us, it makes us angry, that makes us sad. And so that is incredibly overwhelming to have that level of exposure to distressing stories that are particularly distressing to us based on who we are, how we identify politically. That's a difficult thing that most of us are experiencing right now.
Are there key indicators that people should look out for to know that this is having a negative impact on them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in general, if you're a compassionate person who has empathy for other folks in the world, when you hear about something upsetting, anywhere, social media, the news, wherever, you are going to feel upset. That's normal. That is a function of our nervous systems working for us. That makes sense. But if that anxiety or overwhelm or emotional upset doesn't fade quickly, if it's still around the next day, the next week, I think that is a sign that perhaps one needs a little bit more assistance working through whatever the upsetting thing was, and specifically what it triggered in you.
Well, that's a great point, is that trigger, that word triggers. I've seen it so many times on social media, but some of the stories that we're reading, maybe it's about someone we don't even know, but it brings up a trauma that you had in your past that you maybe didn't even realize, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And I think I don't tend to say broad sweeping statements, but I think it is fair to say whenever you notice you're having a really intense emotional reaction that is bigger than perhaps what the situation calls for, it's probably about something more than just the situation, right? Now, of course, when there's something absolutely terrible happens, like 9/11, for instance, that can shake a lot of us for a long time. And if you are having a really intense emotional reaction to something, it could be because it's reminiscent of something that happened in your own life. Or even if the situation is different, it could trigger feelings of helplessness, of hopelessness, betrayal, fear, whatever it is, that does really personally resonate for you. And so that is also an important time to maybe get some help to work through whatever it was that happened to you.
You talk about finding help, but aside from, just altogether walking away from social media, are there things that we can do to set better boundaries for ourselves?
Yes, absolutely. So many of us are very familiar because of America and diet culture. We're very familiar with this idea of we've got to be mindful of what we put in our mouths, right? Some of us are extra super conscious about what we put in our mouths. We should also be really conscious about what we consume with our eyes, what we consume on the internet, right? And to be intentional about our consumption. So, are there certain times of day that we shouldn't be consuming upsetting content? Yes, at night is one of the times that we shouldn't be consuming. How often are we on? Can we set some boundaries around, I'm going to go on to check my notifications and maybe I'll let myself scroll for 10 minutes, but after that, I need to cut myself off, right? So the idea of being intentional about our consumption by setting very mindful boundaries about when, how much, all of these things are really helpful when thinking about how we consume social media.